안녕하세요. 한국 다운 나라입니다. 초대해 주셔서 감사합니다. I'm afraid that is all the Korean I know at this point, so forgive me for the translation. But I'm very happy to be here. And I bring greetings from the independent Republic of Vermont, where Bernie Sanders is still the president. We have not agreed to accept the new one that the rest of the country elected. I also bring greetings from my small town, Cabot, Vermont, where we have developed an eco-village called the Headwaters Garden and Learning Center. And if any of you are ever in Vermont, I'd love to invite you there. So my topic this morning is, ironically, money and happiness. Now they say that money cannot buy happiness, and I'm probably going to tell you a little bit about why. But as I understand it, there is a paper in your program. I'm just going to move this over a bit because I can't see everybody. There we go. There's a paper in your program that I wrote and that has been translated. And I'm not going to read that to you. I trust that all of you, by virtue of your attendance here, do know how to read. And you're welcome to read it and send me any questions that you like. I will give you my personal email address so that you can do that. It is very simple. Gwen, which is in English letters G-W-E-N. That's my nickname. You're welcome to call me that. Maybe it's easier than Gwendolyn in Korean. HS. So Gwen, HS@gmail.com. And I'm always happy to answer emails. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to write to me. So, my proposition is that money itself undermines local communities, thank you, and our collective happiness. Now that may sound shocking to you. There he goes with all my notes. But I'm hoping that this morning I can show you at least a little window of why that is. The workshop this afternoon, I will go over many more details of why this is, and I also invite you to attend that. So before we begin, I'm going to ask some questions of you. And the first question, and I know there are some of you here that may have been trained in economics, but this question does not require training. I do want you to answer though, so tell me, what is money? What is money? Who has an answer for that? I'll wait. Someone must have an answer. What is money? Okay, over here. Money is power. That's a very good answer. But what else is it? Can anybody tell me what it is? What it actually is? Anybody? Energy. Very good answer. Money is energy too. That's right. Now, if you're an economist, they tell you in your classes that money is a means of exchange, a store of value, a unit of account. Anybody here heard that story from your economics classes? Okay, a couple. Good. It's also wrong. that is fundamentally not what money is, but it's what money does. Money does all those things. We use it for all those things. But what money fundamentally is an agreement. It's an agreement. It's an agreement that we will use the won for all those purposes. It's an agreement that we will use the dollar to buy oil internationally. It's an agreement that this particular kind of money is what we use for all those things. And yet, like any other agreement, it's a human institution. It's not a natural law. It's not something that exists in nature, in fact. It's a human institution, and like all human institutions, it can change, which is good news. The bad news is that there are a few people who are very powerful who do not want it to change, so that makes it difficult, but it can change. Now, the kind of money we use now is a very particular kind of money. It's not the way money has always been, nor, I hope, is it the way that money will always be. Right now, the kind of money we use is fundamentally issued as debt. So you could accurately call most of the money in circulation in the world today debt money. Now, the fact that it's issued with debt has huge implications systemically for the world. It has side effects that are not good for the world, including, I might add, a lot of the kinds of effects that were discussed in the first two presentations this morning. The consolidation of wealth and power in larger and larger corporations. The growth imperative, that's a term that environmentalists like myself use to describe the driving force in the economy leading to more and more and more growth. And that growth, if you think about it, when you hear economists talk about the need for more growth, is the ideology of the cancer cell. A cancer cell in your body has that same purpose, that same goal. Growing and growing and growing until you, as a body, cannot sustain the disease anymore and you die. And that's the fundamental tool and the fundamental motivating force of our economy today. And it's leading to all of the impacts you all are seeing in the news. Larger hurricanes, larger typhoons, fires across vast amounts of our countries, desertification, famine, disease, biodiversity loss. I don't need to go into all of these things. I know that if you are here, you're familiar with these side effects. Another side effect, unhappily, is human impoverishment. This type of debt-based money takes money from people who don't have it and systematically transfers it to people who do. It's a giant sucking sound upward. So the poverty that we are experiencing in our communities and our cultures, and the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands, is largely due to this particular kind of money that we use, that's issued with debt, that has positive interest, and that is now a universal worldwide system of cooperation among all of the private banks. Now, I know in the United States, our central bank is called the Federal Reserve. So a lot of Americans think it's a publicly owned bank, but it's not. It's a privately owned bank. The biggest banks own it, and therefore they profit from the fact that that bank issues most of the debt money into existence. I'm not completely familiar with your entire system here in South Korea, but I do know that as part of the global banking system, it works in much the same way. Does anybody here have a won in their pocket? If you have it, you can hold it up and look and see who gets top billing on that won. In our system, it says Federal Reserve note right on the top of our dollars. But those notes and the coins that you carry around with you are only a small fraction of the money that is issued. About 3% in our country, maybe it's a little more in yours. 97%, the other large majority of the money that sits in banks is this debt-based money. I know this is a very hard concept to understand, and in the workshop this afternoon, we have a small, easy game to play to show you how it works. But that debt-based money drives a lot of these processes that work against localization. It works against happiness in human communities. Now, there are alternatives to this. Many alternatives have been developed all over the world, in local communities and local governments, in regional systems, in national systems, that provide an antidote or an alternative to this kind of system. One of the very famous ones is a group I've worked with a lot in Germany called the Sparkasse Group, which is a group of public banks in Germany. These banks are older than the German Republic itself. They've been around for 200 years. So it's not a new innovation. It's actually an old system. And these public banks are owned and operated by the local communities where they're based. They behave a lot like standard commercial banks, except the profits don't go into the pockets of a few privileged shareholders. The profits go back to the communities where they live. This is part of the reason why Germany has such a successful economy, in fact, because of these small banks. They are the largest banking system in Germany, much bigger than Deutsche Bank, much bigger than Commerzbank, in terms of their market share of the German economy. They also have a unique role to play in times when the economy goes down. I think perhaps many of you have experienced what happens here when the economy takes a downturn. The banks pull back their credit at those times. They make it worse, not better. That's called a pro-cyclical influence on economic disaster. But the small public banks in Germany increase their lending during these times of economic downturn. So, for example, in one small town after the crash in 2008, one of the factories there that had been in existence for a long, long time didn't have any orders coming in. No orders. Zero work to do. Now, in the United States, the banks would actually deny them credit on the basis of that. But the company knew they needed to modernize. They knew that they needed better production processes moving forward for a product that they had that they knew that there would be a demand for again. So they went to their local Sparkasse bank and asked for a big loan to completely renovate their factory and put people back to work so that when the economy picked up again, they would be in better shape to move forward. They got the loan because these banks are owned and operated by the local community, and the banking officers know that that factory would eventually be able to operate again. And they had confidence in the fact that if they modernized, they'd be able to make the repayments of that loan. Now that would be called a counter-cyclical act on the part of a bank. There's another system in Switzerland called the Wehr system that's been in existence since the 1930s. So it also has a long history, lots to study if you're interested in it. Now in the 1930s, after the big crash in 1929 and the big global depression that was underway, the businesses in Switzerland were sitting around in a circle and complaining about the fact that the banks had pulled back all of the credit they needed to operate. Now, why do businesses need credit? How many here run a business or who have ever run a business of any sort? Any hands? Okay, well, I have. So I can talk about it. I actually manufactured a board game at one point in my life where I had to get the board games made and put into boxes and sold. So I needed the money to manufacture the game long before I would be able to get any money from consumers to pay me back, to pay me. So businesses often need finance or credit to cover that time in between their production process and the moment they sell their products to consumers. It's just a gap, and banks help them fill that gap with their credit lines. But those credit lines often are withdrawn during times of economic collapse, and this had happened in Switzerland. And these businesses, this is before the internet, this is before a lot of things that we have today, they were sitting around in a circle and they said, you know, the only reason I need the bank money is because I need to produce my product before I sell it to you. What if we just started issuing each other debits and credits instead of getting the money from the bank? And we could do that without interest. We could do that without threat of foreclosing on each other's business. And so they did. It evolved in a system called the Wirtschaftsring, which means in Swiss German, working economic circle. And now today, the Wir banks are all over Switzerland. 75% of the small and medium-sized enterprises are members of the Wir bank. As an individual in Switzerland, you would never use that money. It's really a business-to-business exchange, not a business-to-consumer or a business-to-employee exchange. And this also has been shown to have what is known as a counter-cyclical effect in the economy. So when the economy goes down in Switzerland, the use of the Wir goes up. And when the economy goes up, the use of the Wir goes down. I mean, these Swiss businesses would rather have Swiss francs that can be used outside the country because they can spend it on the Riviera where they want to go on vacation. They don't need them all the time, but it's a very, very useful system for keeping people employed, for keeping the businesses running, and for making sure that there's a lot of more happiness there. So the success of the Swiss economy is not because of their chocolate or their watches. It's really because they have a dual currency system in that country that helps them withstand the kind of global economic shocks that the rest of us suffer through all the time. Now it's very interesting because this role of debt and business and the fact that the vast majority of businesses out there have to use a lot of debt to make their products and sell their products and market their products means that the interest in all of that debt consolidates to form what might be considered a hidden tax on all of us. The positive interest is always being paid on the products and the services that we have, both from private industry and private businesses and government, because also throughout the world, when government needs money for things like bridges and roads, hospitals and schools, it has to borrow that money from the private sector through the issuance of bonds to build them. Now, a colleague of mine who sadly died a few years ago, named Margaret Kennedy from Germany, did a study of this hidden interest tax in all of the products and services in Germany. And she found that in the commercial products that were purchased there, this tax resulted in about a 40% increase in the price of the products. In public housing, that hidden interest tax was 77% of the public housing costs in Germany. In the water system, it was between 40 and 50%. And in solid waste, mysteriously enough, it was only about 12. Maybe that's because the mafia has a lot to do with solid waste and it's black money, I don't know. But what this means is that if we had a different kind of money system that didn't have all this built-in interest, all of the things we need for our lives would be a lot less expensive than they are now. And as I said at the beginning, the kind of money we are using is a human institution. It's not a natural law. It can change a lot easier than the climate can at this point, given all the CO2 that we have emitted into the climate system. Now, in addition to these more formal types of alternatives, there are many, many examples of informal alternatives to the monetary system that you can implement very easily on the local level. One that I have actually created and used myself is something called a time bank. Has anybody here heard of a time bank? No? So a time bank is a system where you use an hour of your time as the measuring stick for your exchanges, not an artificial monetary value. So in my case, I don't own a car. I gave up a car many years ago because I think cars are big contributors to climate change and I don't want to be part of that. So when I have to go from my home in the very rural countryside to the airport to come here, for example, I need a ride. I can't drive there. And so I go to the time bank and I find out who in the time bank is willing to give rides to people, to places. Now the time that is spent by that person driving to my rural home from the airport, I will pay in time dollars. It takes about an hour to drive there and it would take them an hour to drive back. So that would cost me 2 hours in time. And if there's any cost, real hard cost, like the gasoline, I can also offer to pay for the gas for the person to use their car. And so that often happens too. It's not that everything is paid for in time, but whatever is time can be counted in the time bank. And what I do in return to the time bank is I do a number of different things. I sing, so I offer to go and sing for people's parties. I do genealogical research, so I help people find who their ancestors are. And I help organizations write grants. So those are the way I earn time in the time bank so that I can spend it on rides to the airport or massages or haircuts or anything else that you can spend time on. This is a very easy system to manage. It does not require complicated algorithms on the computer, but there are many software packages that have been developed in the world that can help you do it. One is managed by Time Banks USA, which is an organization based in Washington that has developed a software package called Community Weaver that helps time banks get set up all over the world and make these exchanges. Another is Cyclos system, which is an open source software package out of Netherlands that many time banks have used to get set up. And I'm sure South Korea is an ingenious country. I'm sure there probably are similar systems here. Now, there are examples of this type of system from this region of the world. One is from Japan. Someone else may spend somewhere else caring for their own parents. So if you live in Osaka and your parents live in Tokyo, it's hard. It's a long way to travel to Tokyo to make sure they're okay, or to shovel their sidewalks, or to make sure that they get to their doctor's appointments. So if I was in Osaka, I would offer my services to an elder in my area, and I would earn these tickets that I could then spend in Tokyo for somebody else to do that for my parents. It's a very nice system. We set up a system like this in my own community in Vermont that we call the Care Bank. And my own father used it before he died, which was very nice. It helped him meet a lot of the people in our community when he needed to move in with me in a community that was new to him. He didn't know anybody there, and so he got to be very good friends with many of the people in the Care Bank Another system that is from this part of the world a little further away is Bali. This is an ancient system in Bali called the Narayan Banjar system, where people contribute time to their local neighborhood as part of their regular work. Now in Bali, these units of time that are set up for local community work are the way that they do all of their ceremonies. So the funerals are done using this system, and the marriages and the schools are staffed often by people who use this system. Now you're part of a banjar. The banjar is like your local neighborhood group, and I believe Narayan means the work of your local neighborhood group. There is a story, I cannot say whether it is true, but I've heard the story of a man in Bali who became very wealthy. I think he owned a big hotel. And he didn't have time anymore for the banjar work. That was below him, and he stopped contributing in that way to his local community. Very wealthy man. But when it came time for his funeral, since he hadn't contributed to the banjar in many years, no one came. Now, can you imagine in the United States or elsewhere somebody very wealthy like Bill Gates having a funeral that nobody comes to? That's how powerful this system is in Bali. And it, like I said, it's an ancient system. It's a dual currency system that has been around for a long, long time. Now I'm noticing that the time has come for me to stop speaking, but I would like to say that I will go into these and a number of other examples this afternoon in the workshop. And just leave you with this thought. When I was a little girl, I was always told that money makes the world go round. And I thought about that, because I've always had a bit of an antipathy toward money. It's just sort of an intuition that this money isn't such a good thing. And I said, no, actually. Because in order for that to be true, you have to love money. So love actually makes the world go round. Thank you very much.